Got it.
I've got a,
Perfect.
my camera up here is, got it. Okay. Okay, so I am so thrilled to see you. I'm so glad you're here. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first of our Culturama events in November, although this is before November. So this is our leading off event for Culturama. If you want to join Culturama, give me an email. And it's a great event where we're bringing lots of writers and authors and editors and stuff. And I'm just so thrilled today that we're starting off with the Poet Laureate of Los Angeles. So Lynn Fried, so pretty.
And I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, John, for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm here and we've been studying this. People behind me are in a modern poetry class, and we've been focusing mostly on Los
John,
Angeles.
you're
And
breaking up a little bit.
Out of the 60s. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a modern poetry class, and we've been focusing on mostly poets from Los Angeles. And you are definitely a poet from Los Angeles.
Absolutely.
I wonder if we could start off with one of your poems.
Absolutely. So I chose some trying to think of ways that if your students, any of your students were interested in prompts or jump starting their own poems, some ideas that they could use. So this first one that I'm going to read is called the Van Dyke, which is the ship that my father, who was an immigrant from the Caribbean, sailed on to the United States. The Van Dyke was recommissioned for His Majesty's service in 1939 and deployed to evacuate Narvik, its Allied forces, and a few Jews, June 1940, until she ran afoul of Nazi torpedoes. But that's the end of her story. It began when the Van Dyke was built after the war to end all of them. She launched February 1921, full throttle from Montevideo, Pernambuco, Barbados, New York. Fortnightly services she gave to the hoi polloi, and a lot of them came aboard. Anna Pavlova and her corps de ballet bedazzled on the main deck, while Shackleton, the Arctic explorer, was sailing his last springtide topside, his rheumy eyes watching the passing as he leaned out from her stern. Still, lower decks for lesser classes were the best places for hijinks and hardtack. This is their history too. Ellis Island's logbooks tell tales of the Portuguese, Chinese, Italians, and Caribbean Brits, of the Silvas and Paynes who came to Brooklyn, but not until every alien answered, "Who paid for your passage? How much money are you bringing? Are you deformed, a polygamist, an anarchist?" Each was examined. In 1923, A.R. Jenkins, MD, inspected young schoolmaster Thompson, who came, like many others, crossing after crossing, coveting America's normalcy. A grenadine, young Thompson, my daddy, my old man, history's onlooker, a witness to how it all dissolves to watery graves. Thank you.
So this is a poem about history, and I wonder how much history figures into your work.
It figures in a lot. I really like trying to braid public history, like the history of this ship, with private and personal history. So I was able to, all of the Ellis Island log records are online. So if any of your students have relatives that came through Ellis Island, they can definitely look them up. In some cases, though not all, they show the ship that they sailed on. And so I was able to research this ship and find out that it did have this assignment to evacuate Jews during the war, but the Nazis found out about it, and the ship is at the bottom of the sea. So I was able to braid all of that history into a poem that really was talking about my dad coming from the West Indies.
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay. So well, you also write about your own personal history a lot.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't know if you want me or not.
I'm sorry, if I have what?
if you'd like me to bring that up or not. Is that a delicate subject?
No, it's not a delicate subject. Once I put it out there on the airwaves, it's fodder for anybody who wants to ask me about it. So sometimes they're hard to write, but once I write them and publish them, they're fair game.
Okay. Could we talk about that a little bit, and,
Sure.
and what motivated that whole series of poems?
Well, I was always fascinated by my parents' history of, they come from very, very tiny islands in the West Indies. My mother's island, even to this day, is only about 6,000 people, the island of Bequia. And so I was always kind of fascinated by that idea that they left that place with little or nothing and came here and, you know, started a family and all of that. And that's so much a part of the American story of immigrants who've come to this country under similar circumstances. And it was a very rich ground to write about. And I was motivated by wanting to save those stories for the little ones in my family who will never have met my parents, who are now deceased. I want them to know where they come from. That's a continuing theme throughout a lot of my work. Where do we come from? You know, how did we end up where we ended up?
Well, that brings a good question. How did you end up in Los Angeles? And
Well,
how did you end up?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was born here. I'm actually their adopted daughter. They had 4 sons. And the family story is that my mother told my father that she really wanted a daughter, but she didn't trust him to know how to make a daughter. So she was going to go get a daughter. And so they adopted me. So I was born and raised here, even though they had immigrated across the country.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay. That's great. You write about the adoption as well, and missing your birth parents.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the follow-up question. That is really powerful poetry to read. We've been looking at it, some of it in class. Do you have any of that poetry to read, Andy?
You know, I do. Give me a second. Let me just reach for this book. This is from my first book, and from an assignment that was given by another poet, that you can Google your name. And when you find someone that has your name, you can either imagine writing to that person or imagine that person writing to you, you know, based on their background or whatever that arguably will be different from your own. But I knew that my birth name was Pamela. So I decided to imagine what Pamela would say to me if she had a chance to talk. And this is the poem that came out of that. She named P at birth, speaks to me, says, "You think you know who you are. You do not. You think everything's great in your gravy train life, your feet up on the tabaret, sipping fingers of Pernod and blowing smoky O's of Gauloise like you were born to it. You were not. You were born at County Gen, the random upshot of a collision between an urgent virgin, a married man, and the backseat of a Studebaker, though everyone knows there was no joy the night you got made. You came into this world on cotton rough from 10,000 washings. The doc showed up late, then spilled a little Maxwell House on the sheets. The nurses yawned. Mama cried for you for 16 hours before her water broke, and she's been in labor for you all her life. But no one came. No one came to see. So in time, Mama just gave you away. Of course, you don't remember that, just like you don't remember me. Me who never got the pretty dresses, never got the vacations at the beach, never sat down with the family to eat lamb and mint jelly on a sunny Easter day. No, you don't remember me. It's as though you were born to the manor, born to speak lousy French and read Edwardian novels in a hothouse, to gad about at high-toned schools, to raise your finger just so the ruby shines. But you don't know who you really are, Miss Don't Remind Me, Miss Given Away 4 times until you were taken for good. Well, you got my blood in your veins, and you ain't no fancy dancer. You ain't no pearls and piety. You ain't no seashell by the seashore, and you sure ain't no evening out at Lincoln Center. You got me in your veins, got my chipped white fence, my regular job, my $39 a night room in Vegas, and this name that ain't gonna be at the end of any poem. But don't worry, my sister, my slip of a pen. I'll never let you forget the night you were born. My name was all you had. So that came from a very surprising place. I did not plan that poem in any way, but it turns out, of course, once Lynn Thompson came into being, Pamela disappeared, and she's not happy about it. So I was amazed myself by what came out when I sat down to write that poem.
That's right. And it's probably something that has sat inside of you for a long time and kind of just blew out without you. Do you find that's generally what happens to you with poetry, or is it very carefully constructed beforehand?
It varies. Sometimes when you're given permission, like I was kind of given permission to let Pamela come out. And so some poems do occur that way when you either give yourself permission or someone else encourages you to write a poem. Other times they're much more carefully planned and constructed once I say, you know, this is something I'd like to try.
Okay, great. I've got students who have all sorts of questions for you.
Absolutely.
I have one more, and I wonder if you could tell us what it's like to be the Poet Laureate of Los Angeles. What is that job about?
It's an amazing honor, number one that you can't really prepare for per se, other than writing the best poems that you're capable of writing. It's really about supporting literature and the arts in the city, trying to spread the word of poetry in particular as broadly as possible. I have a podcast that appears weekly on the library's website, as well as on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, where I read the poem of someone else every week, just to introduce different poets to the citizens of the city and beyond. By virtue of being on a podcast, anybody on the planet can listen to it. So that was the very first thing I did. So it's really exciting to have opportunities to bring poetry to everyone as much as possible.
Oh, that's great. So I'm going to turn the class over to the students.
Sure.
Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask? And would you sit here as you ask?
Hello, my name is Robbie.
Hi, Robbie.
As somebody who grew up in the inner city in Los Angeles, I was just wondering, like, what are some of the struggles or some of the obstacles that you had to overcome, or like that helped influence and shape your career as a poet?
Well, I think what's important to know is that I didn't start out as a poet. A lot of poets that you'll read, they went to college and studied literature, and they got PhDs and MFAs and all kinds of degrees to help them with the poetry. I came to it late in life. I already had a career as a lawyer, and I had decided I was not going back to school. I couldn't afford it. I didn't want to spend the money. So that meant that I had to study in other ways, by going to workshops, by going to readings, by reading as many magazines of poetry as I could, to try to essentially teach myself, obviously with others' help, but not in a traditional way. So that was a bit of a challenge, but obviously it's paid off. So I like telling people that, though, because there's more than one way. If you're interested in any area, be it poetry or anything else, there's more than one way to get there. It may take you longer, but you can get there. Thanks for asking, Robbie. Are you interested in writing poetry yourself?
I have, just kind of like on the side. It hasn't really been like my main interest, just because I've always kind of been either in the med field, but now I'm switching to more of like the journalism and writing and creative aspect of, just where I want to go in life.
Wonderful.
Yep. Second question though, and I before I let somebody else ask a question,
Sure.
I'm wondering if you actually had a chance to talk to Amanda Gorin, who's like the youngest poet laureate that was announced this year. I'm wondering if if you had a chance to talk to her or like give her some pointers about poetry.
First of all, I don't need to give her any pointers. She's obviously doing very well on her own. I have not had a chance to talk to her directly, even though she was honored in a ceremony earlier this year, and I was able to introduce her and just say how proud we all are of her. But I haven't had a chance to talk to her, but clearly she does not need me. I think what she was able to do at the inaugural was just amazing. And something for us all to look at and aspire to, maybe not that exact thing, but to realize that you can get to a point where you're asked to do something like that.
Absolutely.
That's great. Who else has questions? Yeah, let's Sarah. They're fighting over who gets to.
Don't fight over me. I'm not going anywhere.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Sarah. I'm good.
Hi, Sarah.
And it's crazy. I was trying to remember today the name of the actually short response on one of your poems. So when I seen who you were today, I was like, oh my God, it's her. I'm doing one of your on your poem. I really like that poem of yours, and I just wanted to ask if I can just like, what was your thought process behind that whole poem? Just because to me, it's a very unique and creative poem. I've never seen a poem like that.
I'm so sorry, you were breaking up. What poem were you talking about?
The Beauty Shell.
Oh, the beauty shell. Oh, okay. And your question about it is what now?
Just what was your whole thought process behind that poem? Just because it's a very unique and creative poem. I've never seen a poem like that, and I really like it.
And it was the first time I ever wrote a poem like that. So I'm glad you asked me about that poem. I am in a workshop that I've been in with a bunch of other women. We've probably been together about 13, 14 years. We meet once a month. And someone in the group wrote a poem where she limited herself in the letters she could use in the poem. She had what's called an epigraph, which some of you may know, there's sometimes a little statement before the poem begins. So she took those letters and only those letters to write her poem. So what I did was I decided that I would use titles that I liked and limit myself to only those letters. So if you look at the beauty shell closely, it's only the letters in that title that make up the words in the poem. So there's no M, there's no R, there's no D, etc. There's only the letters in the words, the beauty shell. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do just as a project, but I didn't know what I wanted to write about. And I made myself this long list of titles of other people's poems, which you can do. Those are not copyrighted. The titles are not copyrighted. And picked out the beauty shell. And I was playing around with it, but it wasn't really going anywhere. And I stopped in the middle of writing it to watch Beyonce's video, Lemonade. And when I came back to the poem, the word bae jumped out at me. And it just took off from there, based on how I was interpreting this video, that in some way she was getting on her husband for being a dog. And so it just kind of took off from there. But that was the process that I went through. And I do like to set myself little tasks like that. If I only had these 12 letters, how would I write a poem or whatever? You got to pick a good title if you're going to do it, and you need at least 2 vowels. That's what I learned. So, I'm glad you found that though.
Yes, I love that poem, and I love that it's Beyonce related now.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's definitely Beyonce related. I was hoping she would find it and call me, but she has not called me. So
I'll let her know for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.
Would you read that poem?
Sure, let me find it. I didn't have it right in front of me, but I know exactly where to find it. So give me a second.
I keep doing this to you.
That's all right. That is, we need to be flexible on our feet. And let's put my name in here because I think I only have one poem on this site. There it is, The Beauty Shell. Okay, so listen for the letters, you guys. The Beauty Shell. Bell as beast, eel as style, bats testy, best lastly, bluely astute, as bull, as beetle, as bay, as butte, beauty as lute, thus beauty as lush, late lethal, lust salty, she'll eye, she'll tally, yes, stately yet stealth, yes, steely yet sly. Hey Lath, she taught, hey sleuth, she tail, he heel, he that, she bluesy, she ballsy, she bite, she shall. So that's The Beauty Shell.
Yeah.
Right. Hi, my name is Christopher, and right off the bat, I really liked how you referenced Beyonce's Lemonade because I actually found it to be a great work of art. And that wasn't actually the first time that she's done that. She's also, I don't know if you've heard the song Flawless.
I'm not sure if I have, I may have.
Well, there's a little speech from there from, I believe her name was Amanda. I'm like not pronounced. It's about a feminist little poem in the song. She has a little like feminist little speech on that. So I also like how you said that she inspired you. And my question would be is, who are the people that you look up to as artists that you feel that you have related to in the past?
Thanks for that question, Christopher. I do incorporate a lot of musical references in my poetry, everything from classical music to more mainstream music. I did give Jay-Z his props in a poem because I said, okay, I don't want him to think, you know, I had Bay and I didn't give him a space in one of my poems, so I did that. In terms of poets, gee, there's so many, and ones that I hope your class will come across. One is Natasha Tretheway, who was the former poet laureate of the country twice. And she is the one that really has inspired me to try to put public history together with personal history, because she does that in a lot of her work. Another is Terence Hayes, who is just a magician with language. His last book was entitled American Sonnets for My Past and Future Assassin. And every poem in this book, which is maybe 60 pages, has that title, which, you know, you got to have a lot of guts to just keep doing the same title, and yet every poem is different. So I love that he did that. So those are two that come to mind, but there's so many. It depends on what week you ask me. Oh, I'm under the influence of this one or that one. So, you know, I'm always finding poems. I read poems every day, at least one or two and more if I can. And I'm always finding fresh inspiration. So thanks for that question, Christopher.
Yeah, thing. And then also another one, how is your creative process like? Does it take you forever to get through a poem, or it just comes out naturally and you just start writing right away?
It's rare when they just come on really naturally. The whole poem, a line may occur to me, and then I try to follow that line where it takes me. It really varies. Sometimes I can write a poem relatively quickly, but not usually. Usually it takes a fair amount of time to really get it to a shape that I think it's pretty decent. I don't write super long poems, usually at most nothing more than 2 pages. But you know, the process just varies as to how it comes to me. But usually when I get on a roll, I can sit down and write for 6 hours and never get up.
Oh,
Just because I'm on a roll and it's working and it's clicking and I'm loving it. But that's not in every single case. So I think it's important to be flexible and to not beat yourself up if it doesn't come. The other thing I want to say about that is whenever you write anything, be it a poem or a short story, it's yours. So you may write it, finish it, publish it, and 6 years later say, you know, I think I want to change the ending. You can do that because it belongs to you, right? So sometimes it can be, you can work on something for years. And I know poets that have worked on things for years. I tend to get a little bored after a while. I don't know if I've worked on anything for years, but I have made changes in poems that have already been published.
Awesome. All right, and then one last one.
Sure.
Okay, so this is like not related, but because since you were talking about Beyonce, I'm a huge Beyonce and Jay-Z fan. So,
Okay.
I'm really familiar with both their works. What did you think of the Lemonade visual album when she was doing her own little poems before the song started? Like, what did you get out of it, or which one did you think was the best one that she has produced in that album?
Yeah, I can't say which I thought was the best, but I thought visually that the whole thing was so creative and but it was clear that she had put a lot of thought into how she wanted to approach it and construct it as a whole, so that it wasn't just lyrics, which may be the way a lot of people think of her, but that she had a whole visual set in mind. It was like it was basically a movie, right? But for a small screen as well. So I thought it was wonderful, but I can't say I can pick out which I thought was the best. I think my poem about it is the best, actually.
All right, thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Christopher.
Bye.
Thank you.
Who else would like to go? Kate, you have some questions.
Okay. She just wants to bring her questions with her.
Don't be shy. Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Fine, thanks.
My name's Kate, and
Hi, Kate.
I had a question about your womb song.
I'm sorry,
So-
say again?
A womb song.
Oh, yes. Mhm.
So I was kind of caught up in the imagery that you used in it, specifically the foods that you talked about. I remember when I first read it, when you started talking about the food, I was like, oh man, reading this is making me hungry.
In Womb Song, is that the poem you're talking about?
Yeah,
Oh, okay, the hominy, chayote, and fried fat fat.
yeah. So I guess for that imagery specifically, I'm curious about the word choice that you use to describe those foods. So you said in the line before, you described it as a miasma of hominy, chayote, and fried fatback. And I guess my question is, why did you pick miasma? Since the way that I understood the poem, was it a poem about your birth mother?
It is. Bingo.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I guess I was curious about why did you pick the word miasma? Because to me, I feel like the topic of food is such a homey discussion, when people start
Right.
talking about like, oh, like I like soup, I like menudo or stuff like that. Yeah, see, like making it sounds, it's such a wholesome topic. So
Right.
I guess my simple question is, do you not like those foods? Is it because it reminds you of your birth mother? Like, what was the thought process behind
Yeah,
it?
so specifically going to the word miasma, I was trying to think of this as there's such a range of positive and negative feelings. And this was the speaker. And remember, when you're looking at poems, you're thinking of the speaker separate and apart from the poet, but obviously this is very close to me personally. So the speaker is really saying, here I am in all my anger and frustration and confusion about being a child that you gave birth to and ultimately decided to place for adoption. So that is kind of a miasma of all of these different mixes of feelings, right? The hominy, chayote, and fried fatback. The important thing to know when you're writing a poem, for me anyway, is the sound of the poem. So I wanted to bring in music. I wanted to bring in, as you say, that homey feeling of what we're eating. But when I'm looking to select what those things are, I'm also listening for the sound of it in the poem. So the miasma with the hominy, and then a counter sound of the coyote, and then the fried fatback, long vowels. So it's really the sound
I see.
that I'm going for when I pick these specific foods, as opposed to whether or not I like them or the mother liked them. Once I knew I wanted to use food, then what sounds are you going for to make the
Gotcha.
poem resonate? And those were the sounds that I was going for.
I see.
More than the actual foods, even
Gotcha.
though that's how it looks on the page. That's the thought process.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you so much. And
You're
then,
welcome.
I guess the following question would be, if you don't mind me asking,
Sure.
I feel like it's a bit more personal, is that the poems that you write about specifically your birth mother, would you consider them or label them more as, if you were to label them as poems of love or dislike, or what's the average?
Yeah, I would say they're both. And this book was really, this is the first time I really wrote extensively about my feelings about the adoption. I met my birth mother when I was in my 20s, and it was a difficult relationship, I'll put it that way, for a variety of reasons. So the poems are loving in some senses. They're understanding of why she made the choices that she made. And they're also sad, sometimes a little angry. There's a poem in here, Chord, that talks about when she died, and that, and it came from a statement my birth cousin made when she was very ill and she was dying. He asked her, should he call me? And she said no. And so the first part of the poem is about the fact that she didn't call me, so I don't really know what happened at the end. But then when I thought about it, and I said, you know what? I could have called her and I chose not to. So I can't just say, oh, it's all her fault and she didn't do this and she didn't do that. I have to look at myself too and say, what didn't I do? What more should I have done or could I have done? So this book, when I talk about her, is really an effort to deal with that complex, the miasma of all of that, in terms of how I feel about it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Very
you so much.
perceptive.
No, that answers my question. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. Thanks for asking.
That's it. Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to call for more questions, but I wanted to note that the people who are online can ask questions too. Please feel free. I know you're not in this class, but feel free.
Absolutely.
So who else has questions for her? Yeah, Luis.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. This is weird. So my question is do you mind if I go to the Google Docs?
Sure.
No. Those are the poems that I sent?
Oh no, I'm just loading what I wrote.
Oh, okay.
People put some questions in the Google Docs so they wouldn't forget them.
Okay.
I don't know what I'm doing.
Okay. Let me find three.
Because I need a control C. I would rather, I don't want to type it out.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. If you want to just look at the question.
I don't know. It's a long one. I'm so sorry, but just reading your work, this is like, it's really what you made me think about, and I just wrote it down. So if you just don't mind.
Yeah, go
reading
ahead.
through them.
No problem. It's your class.
He's dropping in the chat.
Can I not do it?
You should be able to do it.
It's like not typing.
You might be. Oh, no.
I'll just read it.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. Do you think the experiences, circumstances of artists bind them to certain paradigms, like yourself, for example? And, of course, if it's too personal, we don't have to answer this, but, because of the circumstances regarding, being surrendered by your parents, you as an artist, and more importantly, your art is heavily influenced by this circumstance. This circumstance is your paradigm. It's the mind affecting, shaping the experience of your existence, the experience being indivisible from your personality, character, soul. My question is then, are you forever bound to your circumstance? Is your art forever bound to it as well? Is there any escape? Do you believe in God? Do you believe you were given your circumstance, which is a painful one, for a higher purpose? Maybe to give comfort to those with your circumstance? Is there architecture? Are you and your circumstances, everyone and their circumstance, intentional? More importantly, I want to know, do you believe in magic?
Well, good heavens, aren't you asking me a lot of questions?
You just have to answer, do you believe in
Okay, so
magic? That's what I want to ask.
I think that writers in particular have obsessions, things that they write about all the time. And it could be personal, it could be political, it could be spiritual. And so in terms of being bound to that, I think that the circumstances of my parents' immigration and my adoption dominate a lot of my work. But it's only things that I write about, i.e. the Beyonce poem, has nothing to do with me or my circumstances, right? So I am very cognizant of how dominant those themes are for me. So I do try to write away from those. But I also accept the fact that those things are dominant and will probably always show up periodically in my work. I mentioned the poet Natasha Tretheway. Her mother was murdered when she was about 19. And that issue appears in her work and has for the last 25 years. It's obviously something that was extremely traumatic and difficult for her. And so it appears from time to time, but it's not the only thing that is in her work, just like my adoption and my family circumstances are not the only things in my poem. I can't answer whether I was put here for that purpose. That's way above the poet laureate pay grade. I do believe in a little bit of magic. Don't know where it comes from. I would not be the poet laureate, I think, without a little bit of magic and alchemy on somebody's part. I don't know who that somebody or group of somebodies is. But I do think for many artists, be they dancers, be they musicians, they're themes that they're obsessed with all their life. And those themes reappear in their work. But I think the best of those, and I hope to be among the best of those by the time I stop writing with my last breath, that won't be the only thing that I've written about. So I hope that answers your questions a little bit.
Awesome. And just one more thing. Do you feel like, again, like in terms of magic, do you feel like a spiritual connection to like poetry and literature? And do you have like any authors like you feel like are on your side, like hovering above you as like sort of like angels?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what writing does is allow me to listen and look more closely at everything around me. So that when I go outside, there's maybe there's a group of them, but there's a little lizard that likes to sun himself on the wall outside. And I spend more time looking at him, I think, than an average person who isn't obsessed with looking at things would do. And that's a spiritual connection to me with the natural world, the way I look at a tree or the way I look at a cloud formation, et cetera. I do think that is a certain amount of spiritual connection to something non-human. I forgot the other part of your question.
Just it was schizophrenic, but like, do you feel like you have like any authors like you like? Do you feel like they're, like,
Yes.
with you? Like,
Yeah, when you were asking that question, the person that came to mind is Pablo Neruda, who is a Chilean poet, and I don't know if he wrote a novel, but certainly a poet. He won the Nobel Prize. And he has, if you haven't read them, read his Ode to Ordinary Things. He writes about socks, he writes about fruit, and he's looking at these things and praising them. An ode is a song of praise, a poem of praise. And so I would say he was the one. I was practicing law, I wasn't thinking about poetry or whatever, and I read one of his books. And I said, whatever he's doing, I want to do that, because it was so beautiful. So I think he is in some ways my guardian spirit, because he's the one that really made me sit down and take writing poetry seriously.
I mean, if you want to believe in fantasy, you can say that he really called you, right? He pulled you from that and, like, introduced you to, like, I
He
guess,
did
like, your
call out
soul.
to me for sure. He called out to me and said, hey, look at this, try doing this.
That's awesome. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Judith, yeah, please.
Hi, my name's Judith.
Hi, Judith, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Fine, thanks.
Okay. I just had a question. Well, I had a couple, but I got really interested when you mentioned that you used to study law and were you a lawyer or?
I was a lawyer, yeah.
Oh, and do you still practice law or not anymore?
I don't practice anymore. And this kind of goes to your colleague just before you. I had been practicing law and literally, this is true, literally woke up one day and said, the thing that's wrong with your life, Lynn, is you're not writing poetry. But as a lawyer, I just was so busy and it was so stressful that I couldn't really find the time to do it. So I decided to stop practicing law. I went to work at UCLA in a different job where I was not a lawyer. My family was not happy about that. They were like, are you crazy? What's wrong with you? And I said, this is just something I really want to do. So literally with Pablo Neruda on my shoulder, I decided to walk away from that career. And it wasn't as though, I wasn't going to do anything. I got a good job. It just was a different job so that I could really try to focus on what I wanted to accomplish.
Wow, that's really interesting. Did you feel like there was like a weight lifted off your shoulder when you
Oh my God, it's like I lost 20 pounds. It really felt good. And my recollection is the year before I quit practicing law, maybe I would fool around with one poem. And the year after I took the job at UCLA, I drafted probably about 80 new pieces. They weren't great, but at least the juices were starting to flow. And I was really getting back into it. So I knew I had made the right choice.
Oh, that's great. And did you go to UCLA for college?
I did not. I went to a small college, I think not far from where you all are, Scripps College in Claremont. And that's where I went for undergrad. And then I went to law school here in the city at Southwestern University.
Oh, that's so great. I have one more question.
Sure.
I just want to know, what is your biggest drive or motivation to write poetry and to continue pursuing it?
It's a habit. I miss it when I don't do it. If you get into the habit, whatever that is for you, we're talking about writing. So you have a habit of writing. It may be every day, it may be every other day. It becomes like any other habit. And you just, I don't want to say you do it automatically, but I'm virtually now listening to every conversation, every TV ad, any billboards I see to see if I find any language that would be useful in a poem. So much so, for example, that members of my family will look at me and say, are you writing a poem in your head? You have that look that you're, because I'm constantly thinking about it. I'm constantly thinking about the next poem or how to improve one that I'm working on. What line does it need? What word would be better? It just has become a habit, like anything else anybody does. If they practice the piano every day, they may not be a world famous pianist, and I'm not a world famous poet, but it's just the idea that it's something that feeds your soul. And so you just want to do it as much as you can.
Well, I love your poetry, and thank you so much for answering my question.
Oh, absolutely, Judith. Thank you for asking.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
I think we have time for one more question if anybody has one. Do anybody have one?
This is your chance. You got me all to yourself.
Yeah, okay.
I guess
Oh, we need you up here. She can't hear you.
Is it? Oh, okay, I'm back. So, I guess nowadays in the age of identity, and there's a lot of discussion about identity politics. Like some people would say, like, us as a generation are kind of too obsessed with our roots and how, like, wanting diversity and stuff like that. I don't really have a specific, like, solid question, but how do you navigate yourself as far as, you know, the child of immigrants and being adopted, and in this age where that isn't really encouraged? It's either you're one or the other, or you stick with one identity. I guess even career-wise, it's either you stick with being a lawyer and you stick with it your entire life. How do you navigate that as a poet and a post?
Yeah, I think that,
Laureate.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay.
I think that most artists and poets in particular are mavericks. And if you tell us you can't do X, that's the exact thing that we want to do.
Yeah.
I am many, 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 many years older than all of you, including John. And I've lived long enough to know that none of us are going to be one thing all our lives. We're going to have different careers. Just if you follow a life through, all these different things are going to happen to you. Maybe you move and you live in another country. So you started as an American maybe, and you end up living in India, or vice versa. Nobody, I don't believe, is just one thing. So for example, if you look at your parents, and I have a poem that says this exactly, you think you know them. You only know them for the period from the time you were born. You don't know what they were like before you. So I have a poem that takes a photograph of my parents when they were relatively young, and my two older brothers were alive. They were babies, basically, and the two younger brothers hadn't been born yet. And my parents look like criminals, right? They're in my mother's got this leather vest on, and I said, Mother, she said, oh, we were on a picnic. Well, I don't recognize them as the people that raised me. And I say that to say we all go through so many changes in our life. We meet people who influence us. They come, they go. Some of them stay, some of them leave. All of that makes us who we are. And so I would argue to any of the people who say, and we've heard this, for example, from on the news or whatever, stay in your lane. Wait a minute, I got a lot of lanes that I can pick from. You guys have a lot of lanes you can pick from. So you maybe start out as a doctor, a mechanic, a banker, and 20 years later say, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to do something else. And that's fine. And I would encourage people to, instead of being nervous about that, to embrace that change in your life, because you got to keep changing to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
You really do. So I respectfully disagree with people who say stay in your lane. You know, we got too many lanes to pick from that are so fascinating to stay in one lane.
And sorry, I guess like one last question to Paul,
Sure.
since you're talking about being older than all of us, even our professor. What would be, I guess, like a rule that you would recommend, or what is a rule that you live by to have a full life?
What is a rule that I live by? My first reaction to that was my rule is to have no rules. But of course, we all need some kind of rules. It's very irritating, but just to be open and empathetic. One of the reasons that I like the poet Terence Hayes, who I mentioned earlier, he wrote a poem, and if your professor can find it for you, I hope he'll share it with you if you haven't read it yet, called At Pegasus, which is such a poem of empathy that puts him, he is not a gay man, puts him in the position of a gay man and really has empathy for this relationship that he describes in the poem. And it was one of his very early poems. He's written a ton of stuff since then, but it's always been one of my favorites of his because of that sense of empathy. And so if I had to pick a rule, I guess I would say try to put yourself in the shoes of someone else before you decide who you think they are, because you don't know what they've gone through. And so, and it's easy to say that and it's harder to do. And I'm not saying I'm always good at it, but if I had to pick a rule, I would say that would be the rule, to just try to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Not everybody. I can think of some shoes I wouldn't want to be in, but that's another story. But just in the main, yeah, I would say try to do that.
Okay, all right, I'll keep it in mind. Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.
All right, take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you found us some poems that we have read. Would you mind reading one of those as our last moment?
Sure. Is there one in particular you want me to read, or should I pick?
Yeah, just pick one.
All right, I'm going to pick this one. This is another influence of mine, and maybe some of your students have read Langston Hughes. And I'll tell you after I read this poem how I put it together. It's called Langston Won't Stay in His Grave. Calls me rose of neon darkness. Calls himself early blue evening. Black smoke of sound. Says, we are related, you and I. Reminds me we are wandering in the dusk, our faces a chocolate bar, facing the night of two moons. And though I'm a lonely little question mark, he laughs. Life is for the living with gypsies and sailors, till the old junk man death plants your toes in the cool swamp mud. Shake your brown feet, honey. Wander through this living world. Get out the lunchbox of your dreams. Stay awake all night with loving, or be a woman in the doorway. Death don't ring no doorbells or say, here is that sleeping place, as if it were some noble thing. Think how thin and sharp the moon is tonight. Don't mind dying, veiling what darkness hides. Haunt like mystery, like a naked bone in gumbo. Nod at the sun. So I wanted to share that with your class because this is a poem that they call a cento, which means that it's a patchwork of lines from the poet Langston Hughes, who wrote tons of books, tons of poetry. And so I picked out from these different poems, maybe over 300 poems, lines that I liked and put them together to make a completely new poem in this one, as though Langston and I were having a conversation and he was giving me advice. So that's a fun thing to try when people always ask, do I ever suffer from writer's block? And I say no, not because I'm so much better or special than anybody else, but this little trick of taking other people's poems, cutting up lines at random. Maybe you shake them up in a bag or in a box or something and just pick out ones and put them together to create new meaning is a way of writing a poem that kind of takes the pressure off of you to think of clever lines. Somebody's already done that. It's just how do you rearrange them and put them in a new poem. So I wanted to share that with your students.
Oh, thank you so much. That's great. All right. Well, thank you for coming here. We really appreciate it.
Thank
And-
you so much for having me. Your questions were terrific. They were thoughtful. I'll be thinking about them. I so appreciate having been invited.
All right. Well.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Thank
Keep
you so much.
writing. Keep reading.
Bye.